when he worked outside the law as the Captain. In the story arc of the Captain America comics, Volume 1, from issue 332 to issue 350, Steve Rogers temporarily gives up his superhero identity and is replaced by John Walker, hence betraying us all. Let me explain. You see, Steve Rogers, the original Captain America, found himself at odds with the US government when they reminded him he was still technically enlisted in the army and demanded he operate under their command. Unable to follow orders blindly, he walked away from the Captain America title, handing over the shield to John Walker, a former adversary known as Super Patriot. But Rogers didn't stop fighting. He rebranded as the Captain, wielding an adamantium shield and taking on threats his own way. During this time, he led a new Avengers lineup with Thor, Gilgamesh, and the Fantastic Four's Reed and Sue Richards. Though he and Reed clashed over leadership, he also ran an unofficial squad with allies like the Falcon, Nomad, and Demolition Man, taking on missions that often blurred the line between hero and vigilante. Meanwhile, Walker's tenure as Captain America spiraled into controversy, and when it was revealed the Red Skull had been manipulating the government all along, Rogers and Walker were forced to work together to take him down. After everything Walker had done while wearing the mantle, he ultimately stepped down and Rogers was offered the role again. At first he refused, but when Walker insisted, he reconsidered. Walker faked his death and resurfaced as US agent, donning Rogers' old The Captain uniform. While Rogers wasn't as clean-cut during this era, he never turned into a villain. He just did what he had to do to keep protecting the country, even if it meant making questionable alliances and taking on missions that hit the bad guys harder than they helped the innocent. In the end, it all boiled down to one thing: trying to find his place in an America that wasn't the same one he had left behind when he persecuted communists. Captain America Volume 1, Issue 78, 1954, was one of those Red Scare era comics where Cap basically turned into a Cold War propaganda machine. At this point in publication history, Cap had already fought Nazis and gangsters, but the 1950s saw a shift. He became more about punching communists than fighting for broader ideals. The Green Dragon was a classic example of this paranoia-fueled storytelling. The setup was already wild. Cap and Bucky somehow smuggled themselves into China, because that's apparently easy, disguised as, well, themselves. Conveniently, their red, white, and blue outfits didn't make them stand out at all because of a festival with dragon costumes. Then there's the mystery of the Green Dragon. Cap thinks Bucky is operating this mechanical war machine, but surprise, it's actually moving on its own, scaring Chinese soldiers and winning the battle for them. The comic never really explains what was controlling the dragon, just kind of implying that maybe, just maybe, the legend was real. While the story was meant to be a straightforward patriotic adventure, it reflected the paranoia of the time. Cap wasn't just battling foreign threats, he was actively sneaking into enemy territory, taking part in espionage, and trying to expose the truth to the people of China. The comic framed it as a noble act, but from a modern perspective, it feels more like Cap playing world police rather than fighting for freedom. It's also one of those rare stories where Cap is straight up wrong. His mission wasn't about saving lives or protecting the oppressed. It was about proving America's ideological superiority. Looking back, the Green Dragon feels like a relic of its time, full of Cold War anxiety, oversimplified political messaging, and some truly bizarre logic. It's a far cry from the Cap who would later stand against government control in Civil War, or challenge America's own mistakes in Secret Empire, when he laid the beatdown on some drug dealers. Captain America's War on Drugs was one of the wildest arcs in his history, spanning Captain America Volume 1 from issue 372 to issue 378. It all started in the most bizarre way. Cap was just on a regular patrol when he spotted Boomslang, a member of the Serpent Society. The villain ran, Cap chased, and Boomslang ended up sprinting right into a group of drug dealers who immediately shot him on sight. Things escalated from there, with Cap arresting the gang, but not before they accidentally shot one of their own, trying to take him out. Back at Avengers Mansion, Cap realized something was off with the mansion's handyman, Fabian Stankiewicz. Turns out Fabian was on drugs. Cap told him to get help, and Fabian fired back with a sarcastic remark comparing the super soldier serum to street drugs. Cap wasn't having it, but for some reason this prompted him to hop on the internet and start researching illegal substances, as if it had never occurred to him before. Determined to take on the drug crisis, Cap tracked down Fabian's dealer and their stash, but the situation went sideways when the stash exploded, accidentally exposing Cap to a new drug called ice. The drug messed with his mind, making him aggressive and irrational. He even snapped at Peggy Carter and his girlfriend Diamondback, which led Diamondback to go undercover to investigate. Her disguise was a ridiculous outfit that still screamed Diamondback, making her about as inconspicuous as a neon sign. As Cap spiraled further, the Avengers had to step in, capturing him and bringing him back to the mansion. While unconscious, he had a dramatic dream about the super soldier serum, as if the story was trying to force a connection between it and drug addiction. Since Ice had bonded to his system, Hank Pym's solution was extreme. He completely cycled out Cap's blood, effectively removing both the drug and the super soldier serum. Now, Cap had no super strength and was left questioning if he could still be Captain America without it. Meanwhile, the bigger conflict in the background was a gang war between the Kingpin's usual drug dealers and the Red Skull's crew pushing Ice. This led to some epic fights, including a brutal showdown between Bullseye and Crossbones. Eventually, the Kingpin and Red Skull decided to settle their turf war with a fight at Yankee Stadium, and when Cap showed up, he ended up facing off against Crossbones. He won, proving to himself that he didn't need the serum to be Captain America. In the aftermath, the Kingpin came out on top, effectively ending the drug war Cap had stumbled into, even though that wasn't his original goal. Hank Pym offered to restore his super soldier serum, but Cap, in a very 90s PSA moment, declined, taking a firm "just say no to drugs" stance. The story was edgy for its time, but in hindsight, it completely missed the mark. Cap's first priority should always be protecting people, even when they can't protect themselves. Instead, his actions leaned more into law enforcement overreach. In the end, it was a story that tried to make Captain America a symbol in the war on drugs, but ended up betraying the very values he was supposed to stand for, when he turned out to be a Hydra agent. In Avengers Standoff 2016, Steve Rogers was way past his prime, looking older than ever since the super soldier serum had been removed from his system. That all changed when Kobik, a sentient fragment of the cosmic cube, restored Rogers to his peak physical state. But there was a catch. Thanks to Red Skull's interference, this new Rogers had been a Hydra agent since childhood. That twist set the stage for Secret Empire 2017, one of the most controversial Marvel events ever. Hydra, SHIELD, and Captain America himself orchestrated a full-scale takeover of the United States, flipping the land of the free into a fascist state. The Red Skull's manipulations had replaced the Steve Rogers everyone knew with a sleeper agent version of himself, one who had been planning this moment for months. While the world was already drowning in multiple global crises, Hydra Steve made his move, seizing control of SHIELD and crowning himself supreme leader of Hydra. His ultimate goal was to reshape reality itself into a permanent Hydra utopia using the cosmic cube. But the cube's sentience, Kobik, had a mind of her own. Instead of bending to his will, she brought back the real Steve Rogers, leading to a final showdown where Hydra Cap was defeated and his empire fell. The fallout of Secret Empire sent shockwaves through the Marvel universe. SHIELD was completely dismantled, and multiple series dealt with the lasting consequences of the event. But for fans, the real gut punch was the revelation that Captain America, the symbol of justice and freedom, had supposedly been Hydra all along. Sure, comic book science did its usual cleanup job, explaining away the canon issues, but the damage was done. The moment readers saw Cap utter "Hail Hydra," it felt like a betrayal that some fans still haven't fully forgiven. When he agreed to work with Kingpin, the story arc of the Civil War comics, Volume 1, Issue 1 to 7, put Captain America in one of his most morally complex positions yet. When the Superhuman Registration Act (SHRA) was proposed, requiring all heroes to reveal their identities and operate under government oversight, Cap refused to comply. His reasoning was that if politicians controlled superheroes, they could decide who the villains were. That was a line he wouldn't cross. At the start of Civil War, Issue 1, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s director Maria Hill ordered Cap to lead a task force against rogue heroes who opposed the SHRA, but since the law hadn't actually passed yet, she had no legal grounds to arrest him. Cap resisted, fighting his way off the helicarrier in what was technically self-defense. From there, he went underground, forming a resistance known as the Secret Avengers. Cap's team, including Hercules, Falcon, Luke Cage, Daredevil, Bill Foster, and Cable, became outlaws, forced to operate in the shadows while still fighting crime. They rescued heroes who were arrested for refusing to register, all while dodging S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Cape Killer units and Iron Man's pro-registration forces. As the war dragged on, Cap became more extreme in his efforts to win. He allowed the Punisher to join his cause, despite their vastly different approaches to justice, and even struck a reluctant deal with Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. While Kingpin double-crossed Iron Man by feeding false information about Cap's base, the fact that Cap even entertained working with a notorious crime lord was a significant compromise of his values. At its core, Cap's resistance came from a place of principle. He defied the SHRA because he believed it violated civil liberties, but in doing so, he made compromises that mirrored the very government tactics he was fighting against. Working with Kingpin blurred the lines of his moral stance, making his fight less about freedom and more about winning at any cost. It was one of the most complicated portrayals of Steve Rogers, showing that even the most righteous heroes can get lost in their own battles. When he allowed Moon Knight to call himself an Avenger, Steve Rogers is known for his unwavering moral compass, but in Secret Avengers 2010, he made some questionable recruitment choices when assembling his covert ops team. After taking over as the US government's top security figure post-siege, Cap decided against reinstating SHIELD or continuing Norman Osborn's HAMMER initiative. Instead, he formed smaller, specialized teams to handle global threats under the Avengers banner. One of those teams was the Secret Avengers, a Black Ops unit designed to clean up Osborn's messes while operating in the shadows. Steve's lineup included Black Widow, a seasoned spy, Moon Knight, a vigilante with a fractured psyche, Ant-Man, Eric O'Grady, a morally flexible thief-turned-hero, Beast, a scientist with combat experience, War Machine, a walking arsenal, Valkyrie, a literal Asgardian warrior, and Nova, a cosmic law enforcer. Sharon Carter assisted with tactical operations. The team had the right mix of skills for covert missions, but the inclusion of Moon Knight raised eyebrows. Moon Knight, or Mark Spector if you prefer, is a dangerous wild card. A violent vigilante with dissociative identity disorder, his mental instability has often made him unpredictable and difficult to control. Yet Steve personally approached him for the team, believing that Black Ops work suited him. That's a bold, if not reckless, call for a leader who prides himself on responsibility. It's one thing to give second chances, but inviting someone as erratic as Moon Knight into a government-backed strike team is a risky gamble. He might be effective in a fight, but his history of brutal tactics and erratic behavior makes him an odd fit for a group meant to operate with precision. Steve bringing him in feels like a contradiction. He holds his enemies to high ethical standards, but sometimes looks the other way when it comes to his allies. While Moon Knight didn't cause any catastrophic failures in the Secret Avengers run, the decision to recruit him highlights a rare moment of oversight from Rogers. For a man who should know better, this was a decision that could have gone south very quickly. When he couldn't stay out of other people's business. Avengers vs. X-Men 2012 was one of those big crossover events where Captain America's rigid stance arguably made things worse. At the heart of the conflict was Hope Summers, the so-called mutant messiah, and the first mutant born after House of M the Phoenix Force was coming back to Earth. And while Cyclops and the X-Men saw this as a chance for rebirth, Cap saw it as a world-ending threat. For a guy who has worked alongside unstable powerhouses like Scarlet Witch, who literally rewrote reality, and Sentry, who had a homicidal alternate personality, it's a little hypocritical for Cap to automatically assume Hope merging with the Phoenix would be a disaster. He didn't approach the situation as a diplomat or a strategist. He just stormed into Utopia with the Avengers and demanded Cyclops hand over Hope. Predictably, Cyclops refused, leading to a full-blown war between the two factions. Cap's main concern was that the Phoenix Force had a history of destruction, but Cyclops had a valid argument. The Phoenix wasn't just about death, it was also about rebirth. Mutants were on the verge of extinction, and Cyclops saw the Phoenix as their best chance at survival. Instead of hearing him out, Cap treated it as an Avengers-only problem, forcing the X-Men into a corner. The irony was that his interference arguably made things worse. When the Phoenix finally arrived, it didn't just bond with Hope, it fractured into 5 hosts: Cyclops, Emma Frost, Namor, Magic, and Colossus, escalating the situation beyond what either side had anticipated. Had Cap taken a step back and worked with Cyclops instead of treating him as an enemy, they might have found a way to safely guide Hope through the process. By the end of it all, Cyclops did go too far, killing Professor X under the influence of the Phoenix. But Cap's role in the conflict wasn't exactly heroic either. The whole situation spiraled out of control because he refused to trust the X-Men's perspective. when he succumbed to his age, not just physically, but mentally. The Time Runs Out story arc of Avengers Volume 5, 2014 to 2015, was a wild period for Steve Rogers. After losing the super soldier serum, he aged into what he should have been, an elderly man pushing 90. Without his enhanced body, Steve's leadership role shifted from the battlefield to strategy, but his mindset also changed in ways that didn't sit well with fans. For years, Steve Rogers had been a champion of progress, constantly evolving with the times, but old age seemed to make him more rigid, particularly when it came to Sam Wilson taking over as Captain America. Steve chose Sam as his successor, yet he struggled with the new Cap's decisions and direction, leading to ideological and even physical clashes. The once open-minded leader now had trouble accepting the very change he initiated. It was a weird shift, especially since Steve had been the guy to stand against government overreach in Civil War and fight for self-determination. Suddenly, he was acting more like the establishment figure he had spent decades opposing. Some of this can be chalked up to his frustration with being sidelined. Going from a frontline warrior to a strategist must have been frustrating, but it also highlighted an uncomfortable reality. Even the most forward-thinking leaders can become set in their ways when stripped of their power. In a way, the story arc was a test for Steve Rogers. Could he still be Captain America in spirit, even without the physical abilities? The answer was complicated. He still fought for what he believed in, but his methods became more controlling, and his disagreements with Sam exposed cracks in his worldview. It was a rare instance where Captain America himself felt like he was losing sight of what Captain America stood for. What other time did Captain America betray you? Tell me right now.